welcome to the 6th episode of Conversation of Change. We believe that everyone can become a change maker, and through Conversation of Change, we hope to inspire you to make a difference to the community, no matter how big or small it is. Joining us in this conversation today is Chris, a professor and author all the way from New York. Scheduling a time with him was definitely not easy. The 12 hours time difference was real. So without further ado, let's get Chris to share more about himself. So hi Chris, thank you for taking time off your busy schedule to join us in this conversation. We would like to introduce yourself to our viewers.
Sure, great. Well, thanks so much, Shamin, for your introduction and looking forward to talking more. So I'm a professor at Cornell. I teach in the business school and I teach and research on two different areas. So one is how businesses can be more sustainable and resilient. So social businesses like B Corps, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, can be more socially and environmentally responsible. I teach a class on social entrepreneurship at Cornell. A second line of work is actually related to sustainability and social responsibility in China and entrepreneurship in China more generally. Until COVID, I spent about 2 months a year in China working with companies there. And I teach a class at Cornell on doing business in China and lead student groups to China every year. So another unique part of my background is that I had some business experience. So before getting a PhD in sociology, I worked in financial services for 6 years, the last job at JP Morgan. And before Cornell, I taught at Harvard for 10 years.
Wow, that's a lot of qualifications you have on hand. So I heard that you have recently published a book called Better Business. So can you give us a preview of what the book is all about?
Yeah, sure. So the full title is called Better Business, How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. And the focus of the book is really how business needs to reorient itself from a system that focuses very much on shareholders. So, paying dividends to shareholders, reducing expenses as much as possible in order to, sort of just raise the profits of the company, to one that is much more stakeholder oriented. So, stakeholders are, the other important constituents like employees, communities, suppliers, governments, et cetera, that are an important input and partner in many ways for businesses. And there's been increasing support, from the World Economic Forum to large companies in the United States to all over the world, really, that business needs to focus much more on stakeholders. And so what I try to do in the book is describe this B Corporation system that has been developed globally. It started in the US, but really it's a global phenomenon. I know there's B Corps in Singapore, lots in Asia, Europe, South America. In this B Corp tools, processes, model that has been developed, I think is a very helpful way for all companies to be more stakeholder oriented. So, while I really support more companies becoming B Corps, I think because the assessment to become a B Corp is very rigorous, it will be very few number of companies that will be B Corps. But all companies can use the tools and processes of B Corps to be better and deliver more socially responsible action to their stakeholders.
Yes, I see. So when you mentioned the word B Corp, does it only mean that companies have to be very stakeholder centric, or is there other other things that the company should pay attention to when they are a B corporation?
Yeah, so I think it's, I think stakeholder centric is one general way to think about it. So to become a B Corp, companies have to undergo something called the B Impact Assessment. And this assesses the company in 5 different areas. The extent to which they respond to workers, communities, customers, governments, and governance. I think that's all of them. And so, it's an assessment, 200 points. They have to get 80, which, for sort of high performing people in Singapore, the United States, 80 out of 200, 40% sounds low, but actually it's very, very hard, very, very rigorous. And so So I do think because the key areas are really focused around stakeholders, that stakeholder management is one way at a general level to think about sort of the power of the B Corp model.
I see. So actually adding on to that, we also like to proudly announce that our company Make the Change was also recently certified as a B Corporation. And it actually took several months of like paperwork, interviews and tests before we acquired our certification. But it was all worthwhile to be part of the B Corporation family. Yeah, so jumping back, you mentioned that B Corp is very heavily focused on the stakeholders. May I ask why is
Right.
it so? Like, why are our stakeholders so important to be like under the B Corp family?
Well, I think the idea is to really reorient companies and the economic system to focus on, not just the shareholders. And so when you think about in a company who the other important actors are, clearly you have the employees, so the people inside the company, customers, sort of the key people that are interacting in commerce with the company, communities where the company lives, the external environment, which, the pollution or the, waste or things that are put in the water, which start in the community but really have global impacts. Things like, CO2 and greenhouse gases, have global impacts. And so, I think it's an attempt to assess like the company's impact on the world and how it can be better in meeting its, responsibilities to that world. So that's why, sort of dividing it up into these different stakeholders is useful, because it provides like a more measurable way to actually do that. And this is, one of the things that I find very compelling about the model is that, it's very easy for companies to say they're focusing on stakeholders or they're being socially responsible, but unless, they track, measure, and are accountable and transparent on it, I'm not convinced personally. So I think, to be a B Corp, you have to actually, track, measure, and be accountable on these issues. And so that's why I think it's a real powerful model for change.
I see. So other than that, because you mentioned that like B corporation, they have to be they have to be aware of all the different type of things that they are handling. So how is it beneficial for this company to be a B corporation? Because I'm pretty sure like their money in stakes to giving back to their stakeholders as well. So how would being a B Corp be beneficial for these companies?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that it's many ways, and as you mentioned, the title of the book is Better Business, and the reason that I chose that title is because so many of the companies, and I've interviewed, for the book about 60 B Corps, and sort of aside that case studies of them before and after, I've been still doing research on B Corps, probably talked to 100 B Corps, people, and now maybe 101 talking to talking to you and Pedro. But so throughout it, people have told me that actually going through the B impact assessment, while it's very, very difficult, it actually made them a better business, because it's not just about meeting social and environmental sort of programs or goals, but it's a comprehensive management system that you learn, because there's like benchmarking information within the assessment, ways to improve, different policies, procedures that can be implemented that you might not have, that maybe entrepreneurs might not have thought about, which really just makes the company better run overall. And so one way it actually, I think, helps companies is that just it provides like a business infrastructure for an entrepreneurial firm they wouldn't have, that makes them sort of more sustainable and reliable. And there's evidence of this too. So, there's an analysis done of B Corps that went through the economic sort of recession in 2008. And turns out that actually they were more, B Corps compared to similar companies were more likely to survive. more likely to grow over the long term. So it's the idea of sort of being a better business. And, it's not just sort of crazy, B Corp enthusiasts that are saying this. You look at Larry Fink, who is the CEO of this company, BlackRock, which is the largest private investor in the world. And he writes these annual letters over the last few years saying companies should be more environmentally sustainable, more socially responsible. And one of the things he says is that this is about, developing management quality and long-term risk management. So actually going through this process actually helps the company overall become just a better run business. I'd say, some of the other economic impacts, I think the biggest ones are around employees. So many of the businesses I talked to said, their employee retention is way higher than their peers. Some industries, where it's 40, 50%, the B Corps is 10%. Attraction of employees, getting talent is so hard these days, but, B Corps, there's so many people that want to work at B Corps because the company has values and they, are sort of positive employee cultures. And so I would say, many of the companies I talked to said, when people fill in the employment form and it says, why do you want to work here? Over 25% for many companies, people say, because you're a B Corp. So I think, these are the things, the key things, I think, that it actually makes the business overall run in a much more systematic fashion that leads to long-term sustainability and reliability and resilience of the company. And then secondly, that actually has huge impacts on human resource and employment.
I see. So B Corporation actually do take care of like the environment, the social impact and their employees. But this is also very similar to like corporate social responsibility in the sense, CSR. So how is actually a B Corporation very different from a company doing CSR?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think it's a really important difference. Actually, thinking about this question is what got me interested in this idea of studying B Corps when I started. So actually, in 2009 is when I first heard of B Corps. And I actually, at the time, I was teaching at Harvard Business School, and I was teaching a class on corporate social responsibility. And what we were studying is large companies in, like IBM or Goldman Sachs. And really, these companies were doing amazing corporate social responsibility programs, having huge social impact. But these are really only sort of side projects for these companies. These are not things that, while big impact and support from the company, are not actually integrated into the mission and center of the company. And one day in class, a student said, we should not be studying companies CSR because that's always just a side project. We should be studying companies that have social mission at their core, like B corporations. And I think that's really the key difference is that, for CSR, it's more of an add-on, and it might be very high impact and good. I'm not saying it's not a good thing, but for B corporations, social businesses, it's much more that the social mission, social impact focus is in the core of the company. So that's sort of where I see the key difference.
I see. So does this mean that only businesses with like a social mission at their core are like eligible to becoming a B corporation?
Not really actually. So, I think a company can be run in a very socially responsible way. So, it's hard to, really, it's hard to differentiate because, for instance, one example is a company in the United States called King Arthur Flour. This is a company that dates back to 1790. They, make flour, sacks of flour. So if you want to bake bread, you go to the grocery store and you buy their sacks of flour. They were one of the first 17 B corporations. They are, a company that is socially responsible, but they're not like something where, they're trying to solve some social problem in the world, but they're owned by their employees, so an employee-owned company, and really focused on, trying to deliver value to their employees as their main constituents. So I think that companies that can be managed in a very socially responsible way, and this is also, I think, very different than social CSR, whereas CSR is about, doing a program like with a nonprofit or in the community, whereas again, sort of the B Corp is about sort of the center of the company.
I see. So, for big corporations, like, I'm pretty sure it's not easy to become certified as a B Corp. As you see, there's so many stakes that they have to run. Like, they have to be aware of their stakeholders, they have to be aware of the environment and things like that. So is it very difficult to convince businesses to turn into B corporations, or they feel like, or because it's they are aware of like the benefits, like they have better managements in their business strategies and things like that, so businesses are more willing to convert into B corporations?
Yeah, I think it's changed over time, so, I mentioned this 2009 when my student mentioned it to me, and, there were about 300 B Corps at that time. Now there's about 3,500. I think it's becoming increasingly easy to convince companies. I think there could be a lot more B Corps, but I think just B Lab, the certification agency, is, there's only so many B Corps that can be assessed, because the important thing is to have it very rigorous. So I think that it's increasingly companies are finding it of value, which is different than it was previously. I think it was a harder sell previously, but it's increasingly more so. And I think that one of the important trends that has occurred is that it's much more larger companies that are taking it on. So for instance, Danone, the global, health, nutrition, dairy company, they, $30 billion company, they've committed to becoming a B Corp by 2025. 27 of their subsidiaries, which makes up 45% of their total revenue, are already B Corps now. And, that's an example of something. And, it's one of these things where it's like a self-reinforcing dynamic. So, early on in the movement, when you had, very socially responsible, socially committed companies like Patagonia or Ben and Jerry's, all, in the US, these companies, they brought more to the movement as far as sort of brand and recognition than the movement brought to them. And so, they didn't put the logo on their products or, whereas now, Danone is thinking like, okay, this is something where the B brand actually means something, and it's really consistent with our values. So we sell billions of, yogurt or milk or whatever, and all of those have the B on them now, and so the B Corp logo. So I think that things like that, it's one of these things where the trend goes at a relatively shallow slope for a while, and then it speeds up. And so I think we're in the process where things are speeding up because of all these dynamics. Bigger companies, also younger, millennial, Gen Z individuals are more looking for, to both buy and work for companies with value, companies that share their values. So I think that's part of it too.
So you mentioned that like Gen Zs are like more looking forward to buying like products or supporting services that are like sustainable or doing good in a sense. So what do you think is that case? Like, why are more people supporting such businesses?
Yeah, good question. I the underlying reason, I don't know, to be honest. I just know from my students and from surveys. I mean, there's a lot of evidence from surveys, and I see it in my students, both the fact that way more students take my classes now than took them before. And when I talk to them, I can tell there's a passion there to actually, make this their life work, to find a company where they can, do a job that's consistent with their values and way of living. In some ways, it's almost like, this is a simplistic way to think about it, but sort of economic development theory almost is that, you need to fulfill sort of basic needs first, and that your parents fulfill those, and your grandparents, and then you have economic stability, and you can sort of start thinking a little bit more about changing the world.
I see. So it's because like our parents built up a foundation of like economic stability.
That's part of it, I think. Yeah. Without that, probably there. Yeah.
So we do have the freedom to choose and pursue what we like now.
Right.
I see. So you mentioned that earlier on that more and more companies are turning into a B Corp. So what do you think is the future of the B Corporation movement?
I think that one of the things, and I already alluded to this, is that larger companies, I think, are going to become B Corp. So, one of the critiques of the model is that it's mostly been small and medium-sized companies. So even companies like Patagonia, Ben & Jerry, Seventh Generation, which is also a U.S.-based healthy cleaning, care, and beauty company. They're a couple $100 million, $billion. And I should say, a lot of the examples I'm using are the U.S., but the B Corp movement is over half of the companies, well over half of the companies are outside the U.S., from, a lot in Europe, a lot in South America, Australia, a decent amount, less so in Asia. So, not a ton in Singapore, mainland China, not that many. India, very, very, very little, actually. Taiwan and Hong Kong, for their size, have a decent amount. Japan and Korea, pretty low also. So, I guess, yeah. So my examples I'm giving are American, but just give you a sense of the global perspective.
Sure.
So even at a couple hundreds of millions, 1 billion, that's for me a tremendously large company. But in the overall scheme of the world, it's actually very small. Like Danone, I mentioned, $30 billion. That's not even a huge company. So one of the things that I think is really important if this movement is going to change sort of the economic systems in the world is to actually get large companies on board. And just recently was announced 6 large global companies have committed to becoming and be part of a new B Corp movement program to sort of have a slower on-ramp to the B Corp system. So, as you mentioned, the assessment is very difficult. And if you think about it, if you're a multinational company, you have, maybe, 20 legal subsidiaries across, 15 countries. And actually just the logistics of figuring out how to actually go through the assessment is daunting. And so these 6 companies are going to be, working together on a program to, slowly become a B Corp. And so I think this new program and the fact that these 6 companies, Danone is one of them, will really, they'll provide an example of how large companies can go through this. And I think that, the future of the movement really is going to be larger companies, and particularly in Europe and South America. I think the US, while I think a lot of the entrepreneurial firms are from the US, I think just the Wall Street domination, still very short-term oriented, makes it harder for US companies to do it.
I see. So the future of B Corporation movement will probably be many larger companies joining into this movement. So does this actually bring up the economic situation of the world if more B Corps are being formed in the future?
Yeah, I think it has hopefully a positive impact. I think that you think to see these things like COVID, where this huge economic shock to the world. Yes. I think that if companies are more resilient and more able to take care of their stakeholders, that many of those, the shock will be muted in many ways. It won't be as severe as it probably would have been.
I see. So going backwards, okay, so you
Okay.
you shared a bit about like B Corporation and everything, and we actually have interviewed the previous five conversation of change. We have interviewed like people from a non-profit organization, a social enterprise, a social
Okay.
movement, and a co-op. So is
Wow.
a B yeah, so it's a B Corp different from all of this, or is it in similar in some ways?
Yeah, no, I think it's similar. So I have to think about these. I wish I, like was in my classroom, I could have a board to draw everything because I think we have some complex. So
Mm,
you mentioned nonprofit. So I think that an important distinction uh, to make is whether the company's legal forms is an important distinction to make. So nonprofit is a legal form
mm,
of a company. So you could have for-profit, not-for-profit. A B corporation is a company, so it's a for-profit. So in that way, it's different than a nonprofit. Social enterprise, I think, is a more general term, and that is, um, I think that B Corps many times can fit, they could be called social enterprises. Many nonprofits can too.
mm,
I think that the thing about B Corporation is that it's a certification. So, it's from an external third party independent is actually assessing the company's, activities and behaviors and a variety of things. So that's how, so many, there's many businesses that you might be able to consider social enterprises, many nonprofits, maybe they're sort of organizations that are for social good. The B Corps are a certain segment of those that are uh, certified by this third party. Co-op, you know, so at least in the United States, I'm not sure about, Singapore, but, there's cooperative ownership structures with a variety of different types of owners. So there's could be employee owners, could be a community owners, suppliers could own it, and so that's an ownership type. And there's many B Corps, like King Arthur Flour that I mentioned to you is a co-op, is a cooperative owned by its employees. There's a very well-known dairy company in the U.S. called Cabot, which is a supplier-owned co-op, which is a B Corp. So I think it sort of is, I could draw a variety of different circles, and there's some overlaps with all these, but it's great that you're investigating all these different types, because I think that when we think about ways of solving difficult, intractable social problems, there's not one model that fits. And so, many of your listeners might think, oh, this B Corp thing really doesn't work in my sector because I'm doing this, or maybe some will say, oh, that's something I hadn't thought about, but maybe it'll work. So I think it's good to have a comprehensive view like you're doing through these podcasts.
I see. So speaking about like, because earlier on, like we mentioned about sustainability in businesses and things
Right.
like that. So does B Corp actually help with business sustainability in terms of like economic, like economic situations?
I think definitely, without a doubt. I mean, I think that this is, I think, at the core. Where I was mentioning earlier about sort of better business. I think that by going through the assessment, it's really about being more sustainable overall as a company. So without a doubt, definitely.
I see. Okay, so for the last question before we pass our
Sure.
time on to Pedro, so because our podcast is, we believe that supporting is equally as impactful as doing, especially for our youths who might not have the ability to actually start doing their actually
Okay.
like joining the B Corporation or anything. So can you share with us, especially to our young change maker, how they can actually support the B Corp movement?
Sure. So uh, one of the things I always say, is people are consumers, and they buy products. They could be anything from buying sort of pencils and pens in the store to clothes to more expensive jackets. And I think I personally always try to buy from a company with a social impact. I think that this is the biggest thing that we as individuals can do is in some ways vote. You know, in the United States right now, you know, there's a lot of discussion about voting. And so I always think about it that, you know, we every day with our money we spend, we make choices. We vote for the types of companies and products that we want to support. And so I think that what the young people can do is investigate companies and buy from, don't just buy the thing that looks the best. I mean, you should get things that look good. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but buy the things that are produced in a sustainable, ethical way and that last. You know, there's so much nowadays in these sort of fast fashion where, you know, things are made very quickly and they may look good, but they fall apart fast. And you know, one of the early B Corps, Patagonia, you know, the founder of Patagonia had this saying, you know, that you should consume, gosh, I'm forgetting his quote. So the idea is that buy high quality things and then stick with them. You know, I mean, don't just buy a lot of inexpensive things. And so I think, you know, as consumers, the people, people that listen, people you work with can actually make a big difference. And so they should think about that.
I think it's actually quite a good point, but I would like to mention that because like there are many different options. So let's say I want to buy a bag, but like this company provides it at $10 and this company that produces it ethically as it's a B Corp, it probably sells at like $50. So maybe as like youths in general, we'll probably, right, because our buying power is quite limited.
Right.
Yeah. So we normally tend to direct our buying towards the cheaper alternatives rather than the
right,
long-lasting and durable one instead. So is there like a way that we can change this mindset of these youths, or is it just promoting more B Corps to them?
I think, yeah, part of it's promoting and part of it I understand. I mean, you know, it's sort of if the you know, I, you know, very much understand that. I mean, if the difference between $10 and $50, that's, you know, I can understand maybe choosing, but hopefully many times it's not that stark of a difference. And I think, yeah, things like, you know, this podcast, you know, what B Corporation companies are doing is hopefully starting to make a difference.
Yes, hopefully. So before we wrap up today's conversation of change, we have another special guest with us, Pedro, the co-founder of our social enterprise, Make the Change. As we have mentioned earlier, Make the Change was recently certified as a B Corporation. Therefore, apart from a youth standpoint of understanding the B Corp movement, we would like to ask you, Chris, some question based on a corporate perspective as well. So let me pass my time on to Pedro so that he can gain some corporate insights about the B Corp movement.
Great. Well, thank you, Shamin, for the great questions. Great to talk. And Pedro, very happy to talk with you too.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for joining our conversation on change. So we have one question, especially now that is happening in the pandemic. So many enterprises and many B Corps are facing challenges. You think that there's going to be any troubles for the B Corp movement or the social good movement with all of this?
I mean, I think that, I mean, it's, you know, the world is stretched in a really tough way. I mean, so, you know, I think that, I think all businesses are having a hard time. I mean, except for like sort of these high tech companies that seem to be they're doing very well, I guess. But I mean, I think the majority of businesses that are in sort of the real economy are struggling. And I think it's my sense though, is that the B corporations, because they are more conscious of how they interrelate with other stakeholders and are sort of built to last, are better positioned to make it through the pandemic. Like I mentioned, you know, there was the study of B Corps that went through the 2008 financial crisis in the United States and found that actually the B Corps survived at a much higher rate than other companies, and then ended up having much higher growth sort of later on. So So I've talked to a lot of B Corps, mostly in the US, but some in Europe and South America, and they're having a hard time. But I feel that because because they're so much more embedded in their communities, that perhaps they're getting more social support, more economic support from their companies, their communities. Like one company that I've talked to a couple of times is called Rhino Foods. They're based out of Burlington, Vermont, in the United States, in the northeastern part of the United States, and they make dessert products, and have been operating through COVID. Had a variety of different programs for their employees, where employees get meals. If they'd still get paid if they didn't feel like they could make it in because they worried about COVID or the social distancing. They also started a program where they wanted to support the community too. So they started this meals program for their employees, where they would actually be buying meals from community restaurants to help distribute to their employees in a way that actually, because they want to make sure that all their stakeholders are well taken care of. And this is something where it sounds like it's more expensive for the company, and I guess it is. But then those community people, I'm sure, also are buying the products and helping support this company. So I feel that my experience with the B corporations is that they're more embedded with the different stakeholders in their in their environment, and that leads to a variety of benefits and reciprocity that hopefully will get them through this in a more effective way.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. Especially we see it also here in Singapore, that all the other B Corps, we're trying to collaborate with others and support each other. So that's something that we're trying to do.
Right.
Another interesting question that I have is, because you've been teaching social entrepreneurship and business schools. You think B Corp or social innovation, social entrepreneurship should be mandatory for all business school students?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe. I mean, I think that, there's certain topics in this general area that I think should be mandatory. Like, for instance, like ethics, I think should be mandatory. There should be mandatory ethics classes. Maybe some, like a choice of, a suite of things like an environmental sustainability class, social responsibility, social entrepreneurship. The issue I find with, if for something like this, if you make it mandatory, then there's a lot of people that actually are annoyed about being in the class. I mean, so I teach, so at Cornell, I teach in two different programs. One is the main MBA program, which is in our Ithaca campus. And then I also teach in an MBA program in New York City. It's called New York Tech or Cornell Tech Campus. And when this Cornell Tech Campus started, actually, they had this social entrepreneurship class that I taught as a required class. And, many students didn't like it, didn't want to be there. And so I found, though, so I taught it like that for 2 years, and then I had it switched to be an elective. And you know what? I mean, probably, 60% of the students end up taking it anyways. And I think it ends up being a much more high impact class because everyone is really sort of enthusiastic about it being in it. So, it's a hard thing to say. Maybe those other people should be exposed to these ideas. I think, and I think there's some things like ethics that probably you just have to force the students to. But, and I guess because this is a topic that millennials are interested in, students are interested in nowadays, and there does seem to be a lot of people taking the classes, that I would think that just keeping as an elective for now would probably be best.
In Singapore, they started this diploma in social entrepreneurship. So Shremian started social entrepreneurship.
That's great.
So
I think that's kind of thing is great. So you have, like, Cambridge, I think, has like a master's in social entrepreneurship. Peking University, where I've talked to people, has a master's in social enterprise management. So I do think actually those type of programs, having those programs is hugely important, because you have so many people that actually want to learn and improve in this area, and it'll be really helpful to sort of really push the sector ahead. But in a generalist MBA program, if you try to require something like this, you know, maybe it will backfire.
That's true. And I think for the last question that we have for today is, how do you see the B Corp movement in 10 years' time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So 10 years is a long time away. You know, it's sort of funny because I started studying this about 10 years ago. You know, 2009, 2010, I wrote the first case study on B Lab. And it's amazing, you know, it went from 300 B Corps to now 3,500. Plus, you know, there's all these, I mean, I see that, like the thesis of my book and where I see the bigger impact of the B Corp movement is that there are all these tools and processes that any company can use. So, you know, how far things have come in the last 10 years makes it very hard to speculate about 10 years out. But, you know, since you asked the question, I mean, I think that a substantial portion of large companies will be engaging with this movement. I mean, I think that there is this increasing interest in companies being stakeholder driven, but no one knows what actually that is. And this provides, in some ways, like a cookbook almost to be stakeholder driven. I think that that consumers will understand the logo and look for it. I think this is something that, you know, there's all kinds of surveys that people, particularly millennials, want to buy from companies that have a social mission and are good for the world, but it's actually hard to know what those companies actually are. And so having the B logo is sort of one way to know what one of those companies are. So I think it's, I think spread to larger companies, spreading in the public markets, so many B corporations public, and, you know, consumer awareness, you know, very high because these, the B will be on more products.
That's true. So thank you very much for your time. And also, we invite all our readers to check out your book. I know it's available in Amazon, and especially I only read on ebook, so you can get it in your Kindle, and then it's easier to read. And because I'm not sure if it's available in Singapore, you can buy the actual book, but if not, I think on e-version is available.
Yeah, so definitely the e-version is available, and I think, and I don't know about Singapore, but I know that I recently sold the rights in mainland China, so for the people in Singapore that read Chinese, there'll be a Chinese version as well.
Yeah. So hopefully when borders open again, if you come to visit to Singapore, it will be lovely to meet you in person.
I would love to do that. I visit, in the past, I've visited Singapore probably 4 or 5 times in the past, and I would really like to come back again.
Okay, so show me you can do your closing.
Okay, so we have come to the end of Conversation of Change. Thank you, Chris, for your time once again. We have learned so much more about the B Corp movement and have definitely gained professional insights, which are very informational, not only for ourselves, but for our viewers as well. So thank you for our viewers. Thank you so much. And thank you for tuning in. And we hope to see you in our next one. So bye-bye.
Great. Thank you both. Great to meet. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.